And again, you can also join our Patreon at patreon.com/techlore if you want to be a part of our community and support the work that we're doing. It really means a lot. We couldn't have done anything that we did in 2023 without the support from people on Patreon. You're all just fantastic.
Thank you very much to all of our patrons for asking questions. We appreciate you guys.
So we really appreciate all that support. We couldn't do it without people on Patreon. So thank you all very much for your support. We couldn't do it without all of you.
With such gratitude, it's hard to believe any paying patron would be discarded. And yet there's one patron who's almost been completely forgotten, Caption8169. An entire year has passed, and yet nobody from techlore or surveillance report have remedied the situation, despite numerous opportunities to do so. Join me today as we recognize Caption8169, despite being swept under the rug by the creators they supported. In April of 2023, Surveillance Report announces a new approach to their Q&A section.
All right, and now the Q&A. And so Nate and I were talking for the last couple weeks about what we're going to do as we get more and more questions. And so our current solution is we are going to answer about 2 to 3 questions. We'll kind of just pick and choose a small selection of questions for the official surveillance report. So in this case, we're going to answer Richard and Anon Patron's question. However, there are 2 more questions here from Edhead and just Patreon. That's their username there, just Patreon. Very creative username. However, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be releasing those latter 2 questions as just quick shorts throughout the week. It's a way for us to upload a little bit more, be a little bit more engaged with our audience here, and it also won't take up as much time because we've been editing these and we realized that for some reports, almost half of the report is just the Q&A section. So we're going to try to keep it a little bit shorter, and that also forces us to have to answer your questions within a 1-minute period. So it's just a way for us to still answer all of your questions, not take up too much of our time, but we still get to pick some questions that we think would be really good to answer in the long form factor as well. So feel free to leave any feedback on that idea. We're going to try it out this week so you all can see what that looks like, and then we will make modifications from there. But we're going to be answering Edhead and Patreon's questions later this week as shorts, and we're going to answer Richard and Anon Patrons right now.
It's not surprising if you don't remember their weekly shorts. The gimmick only lasted for a few months before being completely abandoned in July of 2023. There was never a reason given or any formal explanation why the shorts were discontinued. Even searching techlore's forum gave no answers. That's not to say they've stopped doing shorts altogether. Despite expressing their dislike of shorts in general, both Henry and Nate continue to make them for their respective channels. In episode 130 of Surveillance Report, there were 4 Patreon questions presented in the Q&A portion of the video. 2 were answered in the video, while the other 2 questions were reserved for upcoming shorts for that week.
All right, and then just to kind of preview the shorts, so make sure to stay subscribed. We're going to have a question from Potty who asks, after 130 episodes of Surveillance Report, what are the main takeaways for you and what lessons did you learn? Nate and I will probably do individual responses to that, so we'll have 2 answers for Potty. And then Caption8169 asked about security for like banks and brokerage accounts, and we will probably get back to that in just 1 short. So we'll probably have 3 shorts this upcoming week before we come back next week for the next Surveillance Report 131.
Following that episode, only 2 shorts were made, both answering Pai's question only.
So the question is, after 130 episodes of Surveillance Report, what are our takeaways, or what have we learned? First of all, I would also like to offer an apology for falling behind. I was moving last week. Things have been a little crazy. Hopefully they should be returning to normal soon. I think my biggest takeaway has actually been how scary common data breaches are. The data breach section was actually something I insisted we keep when I joined Surveillance Report. It was a section I had on my podcast, and I was like, I think this is really important so that people understand how common these are. At the time, my podcast was still pretty new, so even I didn't quite realize how freakishly common they are. Data breaches happen a lot. But to kind of piggyback off what Henry said, I think it's also kind of interesting how easily so many of them could be prevented. You know, some of them are pretty advanced, but some are pretty straightforward. If you want to ask us a question, be sure to join Patreon, and we might answer your question in a short or on an episode, just like this.
Our patron Potty asked, after 130 episodes, what are the main takeaways for you? What lessons did you learn? Now first, thanks everyone for the patience as we're trying to catch up. We're doubling down on news this week and to cover the last 2 weeks. But to answer the question itself, I've learned that there's an overwhelming amount of privacy news that's almost impossible to keep up with. But the theme is that the basics do tend to protect most people in a majority of the stories that we cover. Those include use unique passwords, use 2FA, avoid invasive services in general, freeze your credit, and please keep your software up to date. That's actually kind of the biggest takeaway for me doing this podcast. There's endless stories, and most of them I think can be prevented with just those basics. Not that I don't think you shouldn't go further than that, but the basics are very powerful. We'll see you in the next short, and if you want to ask us questions, join our Patreon down below, and we'll see you this weekend. Thank you, Potty, for being a patron of ours. You're awesome.
Caption8169 never got their own short. Their question wasn't even featured in any subsequent surveillance report episodes. There were several opportunities where there were no questions or only 1 to 2 questions for their Q&A section. Opportunities where Caption8169 could have been answered as promised.
So the Q&A, again, there were no questions this week.
Okay, with that, we'll move into the Q&A, or we would move into the Q&A, but nobody asked any questions this week. Henry stole my thunder. There's no misfits this week. And we only actually have 1 question. So friendly reminder, Q&A is available to patrons, $5 a month. This week's question comes from Cookie Gaming, who says, what are your thoughts on AI tools from Google and Microsoft respectively? Do you think they will use it as a data collection tool, or do you think they will be more privacy protecting with it? Obviously, I can't speak for Henry. I will say if Henry disagrees with me, I will encourage him to put up a YouTube short later this week, saying his perspective. Yeah, like I said, if Henry has any thoughts to add, I'll let him know when he gets back to go ahead and make a short later this week and share his thoughts on that.
And there's no misfits, so that's actually it for the stories this week, and then we're going to hop into the Q&A. Again, these Q&A questions are asked by our patrons who are awesome, and they're supporting us over at patreon.com/surveillancepod. If you want to ask a question, we only got 1 this week, and we can normally accommodate like around 3 each week, and then we can even do more now with shorts throughout the week. So if you want to join our Patreon Q&A, you have to join our Patreon. So that's in the description, and it also helps us keep this podcast going and growing forever. We're never going to stop. So,
I mean, I hope I die someday.
Neither Nate nor Henry made a public acknowledgement or even an apology to Caption8169. It seems they were forgotten about altogether. After noticing the lack of response, I decided to mention it to Henry and Nate. Tweeting seemed to be the only option since I was apparently banned from their YouTube comments. I made 3 separate tweets over the course of 4 weeks. The only response I received was being blocked from both techlore and surveillance report Twitter accounts. I also released multiple videos highlighting the issue in the hopes it would finally catch Nate and Henry's attention. Even after that, there was still no acknowledgement or apology given to Caption8169. Even a viewer asked about it during a live stream where both Jonah and Henry failed to recall the issue entirely.
Mohammed20ZX asked a question. Why did you forget about answering Caption8169 question? I don't know the context of that, do you?
I don't know what that is either.
I'm not sure what that means, unfortunately.
As a follow-up, I posted an explanation on the techlore forum. It was then that Henry finally acknowledged the issue and gave an explanation. 4 months after Caption8169 was forgotten about, there was finally an answer.
You're blocked from commenting as you're a known troll that actively spreads disinformation about several legitimate privacy projects in bad faith, as is this case as well. For those wondering, this has been taken care of for 3 months now by Nate. Hey Caption, it's come to my attention that we promised to answer this in a short, and then never did. I think I was under the weather, and it simply slipped my mind. Anyways, the short version is that when it comes to security, not privacy, I'm personally convinced that most financial institutions actually take security a lot more serious than it looks. I know it doesn't seem like it, given the poor password requirements, lack of TOTP hardware, 2FA, etc. But there's a lot going on behind the scenes that makes up for it. In light of that, I would focus more on the financial side of things. Look for something that fits your goals, has good returns, and is FDIC insured. I wrote about this at length here. Hope that helps, and sorry for letting this get away from us.
Henry's post continues.
If you read post, you'll find, specifically, some weeks we'll only do one question. Some weeks we may do more. Due to time constraints, we can't promise that we'll get to yours, but we appreciate all of them. Techlore, I legitimately wish you spent time creating your own privacy resources that you felt was better than ourselves and other people. We need more people pushing the envelope, and it'd be a net gain for the community for you to develop your own resources with different perspectives on issues.
There are a few things to bear in mind when looking at Henry's reply. First is the fact that Patreon comments were not publicly visible at the time. So in a sense, this response was kept private from viewers and with no public acknowledgement from Henry or Nate from Surveillance Report. Second, the timestamps show that Nate's response came 2 months after Caption's question. So within that 2-month time frame, Henry and Nate choose to respond by a private message instead of taking 10 minutes to create a 60-second short. Even at the time of this video, neither Nate nor Henry have made any other acknowledgement over the caption issue. What's interesting is when they recently forgot another viewer's question. Nate and Henry were quick to add it into the very next Q&A video.
Hey guys, Future Nate here again. We recorded the 167 Q&A the day before 168 and the 168 Q&A, so long story short, this question accidentally got cut and we decided just to slide it in here once we noticed. God willing, we will be back on track this coming weekend, and thank you guys for your patience during this difficult time.
As for Caption8169, there has been no response from them, and their Patreon account is currently inactive. For a group that's always begging for money and praising their Patreon users, they really did Caption8169 dirty. It's very shameful, especially for content creators like Nate, Henry, and Jonah, who all should know better than to treat paying supporters like this. It's ridiculous that they didn't even bother to offer a public apology, feature their question in a follow-up video, or even create the short that they promised in the first place. Seriously, they couldn't find 10 minutes to give the same response in a 60-second video for YouTube? It probably took more time for Nate to write that lame-ass Patreon response, or Henry's response to my forum post, than it would have taken to make the YouTube short. Speaking of Henry, just before his long-winded excuse was posted, my user account was immediately disabled. It wasn't deleted, but it meant I couldn't respond to Henry's reply, nor could I reply to the lovely DM sent by one of his forum members. Henry reposting his Q&A disclaimer was also a piss-poor excuse. The disclaimer only applies when a question has not been chosen. It doesn't apply to the Caption8169 situation because their question was chosen.
And then Caption8169 asked about security for like banks and brokerage accounts, and we will probably get back to that in just one short. So we'll probably have 3 shorts this upcoming week before we come back next week for the next Surveillance Report 131.
Rather than admit a mistake was made and making it right, Henry would rather avoid any responsibility. He's literally failing to uphold the only decent Patreon perk he's offering. It's like paying for a lottery ticket, winning the jackpot, but the lottery commission refuses to pay you. Since I don't know when Caption became inactive, I can't say for sure when or why they stopped supporting Surveillance Report. However, it wouldn't surprise me if Caption stopped because of Nate and Henry's failure to uphold their own Patreon perk. While it's too late and may not have worked, it would have been hilarious to see Caption8169 hit Surveillance Report with a chargeback. Then again, Nate and Henry's poor response does go against Patreon's philosophy, which is outlined on the same page as chargebacks.
Your community deserves all the wonderful work you put into your Patreon page. They deserve your honest fulfillment of all the work you promised them as rewards. Failing that, they deserve an honest statement about why a given reward is late, along with appropriate apologies. Patreon will not issue refunds to dissatisfied patrons, but it's important to note that they do contact us. They do also take to social media to share their grievances.
As we close this cautionary tale, I remind you to think twice the next time you hear Henry begging for more money.